Welcome to tonight's Poison podcast. What's your poison?
My favorite is old-fashioned. You can't go wrong with old-fashioned.
These are number one for a reason, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Classic cocktails are the best. So, Justin, thank you. Welcome, man. This is amazing having you here. Justin Aiden is the head blender at Stranahans, a pioneer in American single malt whiskey. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Pleasure having you here, my friend. To start things off a little bit, I'd like to do a little icebreaker. And if you could share a dram of Stranahan with any historical figure, who would it be, living or dead, and why? And what conversation would you have with that person?
That's a good one. Well, last night we were just at dinner in Hoboken, and a nice couple explained to me that Frank Sinatra is from Jersey, right? And obviously he was a big whiskey fan.
Yeah.
And I imagine the stories he would have would be a pretty good one. So that one comes to mind,
Yeah.
being fresh. But George Washington had a distillery. That could be a good conversation. He had a whiskey distillery.
That's pretty cool, yeah. That's true.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It starts there, right, with George Washington, absolutely. You know, Sinatra was a whiskey drinker. I tell you, there was a very famous brand. He used to drink on stage, from what I remember.
Was it Jack Daniels or something?
It was-
Little
I didn't know if I should say in the Stranahan podcast, but I'll say it. You know, you said it, so it's fun. Yeah, they have their limited editions that come out as well. Speaking of limited editions, you guys have some really interesting limited editions that come out too. But before we get into that, let me revert back a little bit and tell us a little bit about Stranahans, what it is, how did it start? It's been around for 2 decades. It's a pioneer in American single malt. Now it's an official category. So tell us a little bit about the brand and the cool top, which is very unique to Stranahan.
Yeah, the whole story starts with a gentleman named George Stranahan and a volunteer firefighter up in the Aspen, Colorado area named Jess Graber. Essentially what happened, George Stranahan had a barn fire up at his place there in Woody Creek. And as a volunteer firefighter, Jess Graber was called out there, and he gets there and he sees, legend has it that he sees George frantically trying to wheel barrels out of his barn before it burns down. And Jess is thinking to himself, well, that's a unique sight. Anyway, they were full of beer. George Stranahan was behind Flying Dog Brewery, one of the most impactful and influential early craft breweries. Yeah. And after they get the fire under control and taken care of, they realized they had a shared connection over good alcohol. And that kind of grew. And at the same time, Jess Graber had always been distilling a little bit. He'll tell you he was a moonshiner. I don't know, 20 years ago you were allowed to say that, I suppose.
Yeah.
And very quickly, it said, well, why don't I try distilling some of this beer you're making? We're all very aware most beer is 100% malted barley. So really one of the earliest iterations before Stranahans as a whiskey company ever came to be were these prototype runs of distilling beer. 100% malted barley beers.
Colorado barley.
That's right. And, they realized quickly, well, this is pretty good, especially if you don't do that whole hopping portion. You don't add the hops, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like a aha moment. That's a single malt whiskey.
Yeah.
And of course, they fast forward a little bit, 20 years ago, by the time the licensing was all in, we were the first licensed distillery in Colorado since Prohibition. And if you think to the landscape at that time, there were very few craft distilleries in the country, maybe a dozen. Most of those were farm adjacent, right? So distilling fruit in some way or another, which means the overwhelming majority of states didn't have a micro distillery at all, even a macro distillery. So it was really a pioneering idea just to open a craft distillery in those days. And then furthermore, to do it with the style of whiskey Americans weren't as familiar with, American single malt, was really trailblazing. And I'll take that even one step further.
2004 was?
2004. Yeah, he'll tell you it took almost 2 years to get the licensing and everything squared away because, again, there was no blueprint, to streamline the process, the paperwork. So it was a long process. 2004, we opened. The first bottle was sold in 2006. So obviously 2-year-old at that time, but pretty unique, genuine story. And the thing that I've always loved the most about the Stranahan's tale, not just trailblazing American single malt, but really craft distilling on a whole, and specifically doing it with just whiskey, because a lot of the times the business plans called for making some money in the short term. So a lot of places it was very common to, distill vodka or distill gin, because you could, bottle it and sell it relatively quick.
Sure.
But nobody had really come out and just done whiskey in a full-size 53-gallon barrel, waited the time it takes, and only done that. So it was an incredibly pioneering vision.
Absolutely. I'm a big marketing nut, and first thing that gravitated me towards a brand was this bottle specifically. I mean, just the shape of it, every different angle of this. The back is flat. The top here, the angular
Yep.
label. They went so much thought went into creating this design, and of course the honey whiskey color. So tell me about this. This is basically a measuring cup.
Yeah, well, this is a cool one. This is a vintage label. We've since gone to a little bit different
Yeah.
style label, but the packaging is the same. Yeah, the lore has it. There's a lot of legends and mysticism swirling around, but my favorite about the tin top was it was rooted in Colorado and cowboy culture. When cowboys would travel around, corks were notoriously bad for making long journeys and not shriveling up and failing. Somebody figured out if you heated up a piece of tin over the fire and stuck it on your bottleneck, that it would, it would seal it back up. It served the double purpose of basically being something you could drink out of, right? Sure, you could take that into the saloon, slam it down on the bar, and make sure the saloon keep wasn't stiffing you on the amount of
That's true.
whiskey you ordered. So
Yeah.
that's the story there. Of course, we've graduated our tin top too, so you can take it home and use it in your home bar.
Yeah. I love the packaging, as I said, and I think for the price, for what you get for everything inside and out is outstanding. Now, you've had a very interesting journey in the whiskey world. Tell us a little about yourself and your history and how you came to be with Stranahan.
Yeah, I think at a young age, I knew I wanted to study science for whatever reason. Little kids decide they want to go into something, and in my teenage years, maybe had a little bit of alcohol for the first time, and I had a moment where I said, well, the art of making alcohol is a science, right? So I studied fermentation science at Michigan State University, and was really fortunate that there was this really maverick professor named Dr. Chris Berglund, who started essentially America's first artisan distillation program, the Michigan State University Artisan Distilling Program.
That's pretty cool.
It was awesome. It was luck a little bit. I'm a Michigan-raised kid. It's my home state university. So that was fortuitous. And, I badgered him until he finally gave me a shot, and, kind of came into a microbiology side of things and a lot of laboratory side of things. And really quickly, what happened was it coincided with that explosion in the American craft distilling movement. I mentioned when Jess Graber got started with Stranahans, 2004, there was maybe a dozen. I think in 2010, it certainly felt like we were well into the hundreds already. And now I think I've heard anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 today. So we've really seen this explosion in craft distilling across the country. And that program was kind of ground zero, because all of these prospective entrepreneurs and people interested in distilling needed someplace to go and learn, right? There's a lot involved in distilling.
Yeah.
It's a small business, certainly. We talk packaging, we've got microbiology, of course, you've got distillation itself, a lot of marketing involved. And because we were a university, we kind of found ourselves a one-stop shop for a lot of different disciplines that would be very, very useful. And we had a full-blown pilot distillery, which was really unheard of.
Yeah.
So you could come in and prototype, and you could experiment, and we could, produce something that you could take to your bank and then show them with your business plan. And it was a once in a generation situation. That program didn't last for very long. It was very selective, took a kid or two a year. And of course, Dr. Berglund passed. So it was a wonderful thing. And I got to cut my teeth in a situation that not many people got to.
That's, brings you to where you are today, and doing some great things with this. You've been with them for a couple of years now?
Couple years now, yeah. So I have only ever been a distiller or a blender, but whiskey making specifically has always been my favorite part. I've made a lot of vodka, and I made a lot of gin and bourbon and rye, But when the opportunity to just focus on whiskey, and specifically to just focus on blending, which a little oversimplification is a lot of quality assurance and quality management. What goes into the barrel, what goes out of the barrel, what might go into another barrel, what goes into a bottle. That's always been my favorite part. That's my hobby in my private life. So when a storied place like Stranahans, who I had always revered and respected as a consumer, right, for a place that was a pioneer, I knew what they meant to the craft distilling industry from the way I came up, and a company that has only ever made one recipe and one recipe only for 20 years. When the opportunity to blend for that place, especially at a moment in time when American single malt was about to be ratified, and I threw my hat in the ring, and I'm incredibly fortunate that the Stranahan said yes.
That's amazing, man. Great story, and you have so much more to accomplish still, right? You're still going, and hopefully, we see more successes for the brand. Speaking of successes, I know it's got a lot of great accolades. San Francisco, double golds, multiple golds, right? What's the most award-winning SKU, which is still, it's not LTO, where people can still go to the store and pick it up?
Yeah, this is it. Our original, our yellow label. Again, undivided attention. I think for 20 years, you get really good at it. And so we call this the OG, the original yellow label. It's a 94 proof. Nowadays, it's a blend of 6, 7, and 8-year-olds.
Okay.
But in years past, if you haven't had it in a while, I mean, this bottle was very likely a 4-year-old. It's gone through a lot of iterations, so give it a look, check it out. We're really proud of it, and honored to kind of carry the torch for the American single malt category.
Now, because of Colorado, there is aging whiskey in a high altitude environment, which can bring its unique challenges and advantages. How does the environment impact the flavor?
It's excellent. What I was surprised to find as a Midwest kid moving to the Rockies is I figured it was going to be cold and snowy all the time, but it's incredibly pleasant. The mountains seem to knock down a lot of the clouds, and it's just pretty nice year round. But it's very dry. It is the high desert. The humidity is very low, and what they figured out, 20 years ago, was that we really benefit from a low entry proof into the barrel. So we fill all of our barrels of virgin white American oak, the same specifications that bourbon has to use by law. We choose to use a virgin charred new American white oak barrel.
Okay.
And we go in at 110 proof. And the reason for that is to compensate a little bit for the lack of humidity in the air.
Okay.
So our angel share is overwhelmingly the moisture component. So our proof very steadily and reliably goes up and up and up in the barrel.
Okay.
But it does it slowly. You don't see these massive swings up and down like you might see in other parts of the country making whiskey.
Oh, like a Scotch single malt, environment-wise. So I guess you're kind of replicating that with the altitude which is there and the climate which is there, and that's a smart way of doing it.
A mile high,
Makes a lot of sense.
It's neat. It's unlike a lot of single malt in the world, right? How many single malt places are a mile high in the air?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Innovation and special releases. Now, Stranahan has put out some really exciting releases over the years. Can you share your insights on the experimentation process and any upcoming projects that you can talk about that you're excited about?
For sure. So it's always been in the DNA of Stranahans, and I think it's tied directly to the fact that we've only done one recipe and one recipe only. That frees up a lot of bandwidth, maybe is a good word, to explore finishing casks, right? So secondary aging in another style of barrel. We've gotten really dialed in and making 100% malted barley for a minimum of 4 years, double pot distilled and charred white oak. After that, let's see what we can do. So we've been playing around with that for 2 years or 20 years now. And that's led to some incredibly successful and impressive releases. Probably most signified by what we call our snowflake release. So first Saturday of December every year, we release a release that we call Snowflake for the reason that no two are ever alike. So as the blender, I get to spend all year long exploring all of our deep inventory of finishing casks and coming up with something I never have to reproduce ever again. And that's just the blender's dream. And now it's turned into this event that's essentially a block party in Denver, Colorado at our distillery.
Really? What time is it? When is that?
In December, like this year, I think it's the 6th, first Saturday. And
Oh,
we'll have people camp out for weeks now. And the bottle will be released Saturday morning. But, Friday night and Thursday, we're food trucks and live bands and music. And
wow.
we really turned it into an event.
What was last year's release?
Last year's release, we called it Red Cloud Peak. So we always name every snowflake after a 14er. That's a mountain peak in Colorado, over 14,000 feet elevation.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, and last year was Red Cloud Peak. Very fruity. I leaned into a lot of fortified wines on that one. Whereas the year prior, 2023, right? No two snowflakes are the same. It was mezcal and formerly peated Isla casks.
Oh,
So
wow.
you had a lot of smoke, a little bit of
That's
peat.
amazing. That's my favorite type. So
Yeah, big Isla fan.
some people either love it or hate it. I love it.
I love it too.
Yeah.
It too. So, yeah, it's been wonderful. We also have sherry expressions. We have a diamond peak or a black label. Every year we'll change the finish on that. It'll be a homogeneous finish. So unlike Snowflake, where I'm using a bunch of different barrels, 2023, for example, was an extra añejo tequila cask finish from Reserva de la Familia by Jose Cuervo.
Yeah.
2024 is currently on the shelf as a Caribbean rum cask finish. And 2025, I can give you the scoop. It's going to be a local brewer's cask. So
Okay.
leaned into some really gorgeous coffee stouts, some barrels of Stranahans we aged. When the barrels were emptied, we loaned them to some local breweries.
Yeah.
They, aged beer.
Sure.
They boomeranged or returned those barrels to us.
Yeah.
And we've had our whiskey in there again. And that'll be coming out soon.
That's amazing. I have to go back and find some of these releases. Reserva de la Familia, the extra añejo, is probably my top favorites tequila of all time.
I love hearing that. It's Cuervo's, our parent company, Proximo's premier expression. And that's something that's been really fun as a whiskey maker, is being able to tap into their history and their relationships with a lot of producers and suppliers. And I can peel off and get my hands on some of these beautiful worldly casks.
Yeah.
That, let's be honest, a lot of craft distilleries could only dream of getting their hands on. But we can tap into that network and get things way above the average norm and really put our whiskey into those beautiful barrels.
Distillery is your kitchen. You're a liquid chef, and you're getting these unique ingredients that nobody has access to.
Yep.
So it's makes it more fun to play around with, right?
It is. It's wonderful.
That's awesome. The interest in the American single malt category has definitely grown over the last few years. What are some of the common misconceptions about the category that you feel the consumers need to learn more about or clear up?
That's a great question. I don't know if it's necessarily American single malt specific as what I've found to just be single malt misconceptions. There's a lot of people, when you say, do you drink single malt? They say, I don't like peat.
Yeah.
And as you know, you said you were a big fan, but there's a whole wide world of single malt, and a very small portion of it is heavily peated.
True.
So
Very small, yeah.
Yeah, we'll say, have you had an American single malt? And they'll say, I don't like Scotch. I'll be like, well, what do you mean by that? And so often they're talking about, Isla, the ocean, the brine, the peat smoke. So that would be a misconception, but that's not unique to American single malt. I know our Irish counterparts face the same kind of questions sometimes.
Yeah.
Bushmills making some beautiful, beautiful single malts, and they've never used peat, and they're 400-year-old companies. So, but that'd be the big one. We try to sit right at that intersection of what American whiskey is known for, and that's a charred virgin American cask, right? That's the way bourbon does it, with the best that single malt making has to offer: the fruitiness, the mild approachability of malt itself, and that's why we have such a dark color and such a recognizable aroma of that American oak, a new charred barrel mixed with, the gentle pleasantness of malt making. So that's where Stranahans has always sat, kind of at that intersection.
Yeah. It's great to see the categories being finally recognized as well. It took long enough. And I think, is it helped the sales already? You seen a spike?
Without a doubt. We've believed in this mission of making single malt for 20 years now. And in the last 2, 3, 4 months, well, I'll give it even a year, people are coming to us and asking about it for the first time. So it's been wonderful. You're seeing some specifically stores start to put shelf space together for American single malt. You're seeing a lot of people go to their bar and ask about it, ask if they have one. And what I think people are really excited about, whether they've never had an American single malt or they drink a lot of single malt, but from other parts of the world, what's so fun about America is we have such a giant country in terms of agricultural differences and climate differences, right? We're a mile high. You've got places in the Pacific Northwest with a totally different climate.
Yeah.
You've got Southwest and Texas making a totally different climate and everything in between. So it's really, really fun when the consumers give it a shot. They realize quickly, wow, this is an amazingly broad and diverse world and range of flavors, and they get hooked really quick.
That's awesome. So tell me about the distillery a little bit. Is there a visitor center? Is it big? Is it, what do you recommend for somebody who wants to maybe check it out?
Yeah, so we're in the heart of Denver, Colorado, and that's a really big accomplishment, to not be 10 miles outside of town in the industrial area. So if you come to Denver, we have a place in the Arts District. We call it the Santa Fe or the Baker neighborhood. Come on by. We do tours basically on the hour. Of course, you get 4 or 5 drams on that tour. You can see what we're up to there. Take you through the rick houses by the stills. Really, really immersive. And then with this past year, we opened a second place as an homage to our roots in Woody Creek up in Aspen. So
cool.
we have a whiskey lounge in Aspen, basically at the base of the mountain. Come on by. We always have exclusives at both locations. So releases, blends that I put together that are not available anywhere else. They're not in distribution whatsoever. So that makes it worth it too. Come on by, get something unlike any other place.
Amazing. Any last few things that you would like to tell our audience listening and watching about the whiskey?
As a whiskey lover in my private life and somebody who's been fortunate enough to turn that into a profession, I always pay attention to the places that are really dedicated and devoted to getting one thing right, and a brand like Stranahans in this day and age where there's so many options, maybe more than ever before, it really resonates with me that you've stuck to our guns and our conviction for 20 straight years, educated really an entire category, and here we are today in this moment. Take a little pride in that, and it's nice to feel that there's still craftspeople out there, working on their one thing and getting as good as they can at it. So to me, that's what Stranahans personifies, a commitment and a belief in yourself and the ability to get better every day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I love about this brand a lot.
Consistency is key for sure. In closing, if you could create a whiskey inspired by any location or experience that you've had or you've been to, what would it be?
I've had a lot of good experiences. The whiskey life will do that to you. What comes to mind? Part of the appeal too of Stranahans is the Rocky Mountains. Growing up in the Midwest, I dreamed of being able to ski and snowboard all the time. And one of my happy places in the whole world is at the top of a mountain, strapped in. And that's because when you're up there, there's nothing you have to worry you can really do until you get down, right? So for that period of time, you're kind of free.
Yeah.
And I do feel it's kind of a evasive answer, but I feel like I kind of get to reflect that feeling making whiskey at Stranahans all the time, particularly with our Aspen Lodge exclusive. Really doing something that I think evokes the idea of getting off the mountain, maybe being a little chilly, getting inside. You feel the ambiance and the warmth of a beautiful place, and you have that first drink of whiskey
With that view, right?
with that.
Wherever you are,
it doesn't get
view.
any better. Yeah, so I feel pretty honored to do.
What would you call it if you had a custom? You could make something like that. Would you say, what's the edition going to be called?
I've always liked the idea of this, I'm not a marketer, so we'd have to.
Yeah. What comes to mind?
Blender's discretion. You pick what's in it, you pick the age that's in it, and you pick the perfect proof that you believe it should be presented at. So it doesn't have to be 80 flat or 100 flat or whatever. Nobody knows the whiskey better than the blender, and nobody knows exactly where it drinks the best more. So that I call it something like that. Blender
I like
choice.
that.
Yeah.
I like that. You got marketing done. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I have a small gift for you. What I started doing with some of my podcast guests starting this year.
Oh my God.
So this is a challenge coin that I did with my logo. And it's special because I had gotten 100 made in honor of 2020. I got it done 2020. So this is number 86 of 100. So that's all yours, my friend.
Thank you so much
for your time.
That's sharp. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.